It can be hard not to take for granted what we consider to be basic knowledge in Victoria 3. I am in fact talking about things that we have picked up on forums, heard from friends ranting in Discord, or just happened to learn on our own through trial and error. Eventually, we can find ourselves in a bit of a rut, often going through the motions when it comes to picking and choosing our favorite laws. That might be why it is so jarring when somebody deigns to ask you the reasoning behind your decision. In the case of the army model, I will admit I do have my personal favorites, but after some very deep thought, I can't help but see all 4 options as viable. This means, for the first time, I will not be outright mocking somebody's favorite choice, because every single option has its value given the right situation. However, before we begin, please take a moment to like and subscribe for the sake of appeasing the YouTube overlords. I'd also like to ask you, before you watch the video and are influenced by my take, what is your favorite army model and why? Please leave a comment telling me so I can better understand the value of each decision. Finally, I'd also like to thank my newest YouTube Premium and Patreon member, Thomas Howell. You guys are all kings for helping me keep the lights on. I am actually putting in the extra midnight oil to make sure that you guys get even more exceptional content because you support me so much. Now, let's get into the video. Maybe a quick glance at Peasant Levies might cause people to feel a little bit of revulsion. Minus 25% weekly unit experience gain, plus 10% morale loss penalty, perhaps even worse, there is a horrid plus 25% political string to aristocrats attached. Yet, Peasant Levies also has some particularly impressive modifiers that put it on par with every other army model. Modifiers that should not be overlooked even if you are playing as a backwards nation with irregular infantry. You begin with a massive plus 4% conscription rate. Even more impressive is the fact that military goods also cost 10% cheaper, while still allowing you to build up your army up to 25 times per state. That may not sound like much, but there are actually instances where quantity really does matter over quality, particularly when it comes to scaring off the AI and keeping them at bay so they do not attack you in the first place. Power projection can be costly for smaller countries, but the reduction in military goods can really help out when you're putting up line infantry or even skirmish infantry, especially if you do it with conscripted infantry. At the same time, the only law that provides more conscription rate is National Militia, which comes at the cost of the ability to create more than 5 barracks per state, which can get very restrictive for countries that don't have a large amount of states to work with. Peasant Levies, meanwhile, does not have that issue. With up to 25 barracks per state, even a tiny country can field a large standing army with an obscene amount of conscripts in the background to serve as a deterrent. For smaller countries as well, you likely will not hit the smaller maximum conscript limit for Peasant Levies either. Just remember, Peasant Levies is supposed to be swapped away from. That is how it was designed. Yet, in the case of certain countries like, say, Great Qing, it might actually be better to wait before leaving the safety given to you by 800 conscripts in your power projection. Peasant Levies is really just the poor man's version of Mass Conscription, so really, it can be powerful when it is used correctly. Still, there is no shame or blame if you decide to stick with Peasant Levies. To be perfectly honest, the only real reason I swap it off early is because I typically run out of other laws to grab while I'm waiting for wealth voting to correct my industrialist/intelligentsia's clout to allow me to get public schools or citizenship laws. Here we go. Now we get a law I can glaze properly. It might not seem as a surprise to many people, but I absolutely adore professional army. Oftentimes, I will forego mass conscription entirely just for the sake of keeping professional army until the end of the game. The reasoning is quite simple. This is the only army model law that gives you a full minus 10% morale loss bonus. By itself, that might seem tiny, but when stacked with a myriad of other morale loss reduction bonuses, and perhaps most important of all, the plus kill rate percent bonuses, it can end up winning you battles that you should have lost, simply by having your troops stay in so long that the enemy runs out of troops before you can run out of morale. Armies in Victoria 3 really are all about stacking modifiers, and it really does feel very similar to how Europa Universalis 4 handles its combat. That means you're often looking for each and every single modifier that you can get your hands on, even if it means giving up the wonderful quantity afforded to you by peasant armies, national militia, or mass conscription. Meanwhile, the other bonus given to you by professional army isn't particularly amazing, but it is still nice to have. Plus 100% weekly unit experience gain will pretty much ensure that even newly recruited troops will easily reach elite status without too much time passing by. Not to mention, if you are crafty and you deliberately keep your troops irregular, thus costing you no military goods, you can even give out military assistance treaties to other countries for an additional plus 25% weekly experience gain. Then, when another country declares war on you, you can just cancel the military assistance treaties and upgrade your troops to line, skirmish, all the way up to mechanized. Doing this can and will lure enemies into attacking you because the power projection of irregular infantry is far lower than that of all the other types of infantry. Doing this will also allow you to rack up bonuses from veterancy while you try to lure people in. Regardless of how you intend to play, Professional Army is my personal favorite go-to choice. You do lose out on access to conscripts, but personally, I am one of those players who dislikes relying too heavily on conscripts to do the bulk of the fighting, so I can be a bit biased in this regard. To be perfectly honest, you do not give up a whole heck of a lot if you pick National Militia, and if you happen to be playing as a particularly large country like Russia, Qing, Japan, or France, I would actually argue that picking National Militia will do a far better job of keeping you safe should you happen to have a very large quantity of states to do the building of your troops in. Why? Because the amount of conscripts that you can actually get can reach ludicrous levels rather quickly. For instance, France can get 752 conscripts on day one should they decide to go National Militia. Obviously though, the downside is that you will likely have to remake your standing army because any barracks over the proposed limit of 5 per state will effectively be lost. In return for the huge amount of conscripts, you do not lose that much beyond the troop limit per state. Overall, you still get a whopping minus 5% morale loss bonus, which is still worth having. One thing that makes National Militia far better than, say, Peasant Levies in most situations is the fact that the conscript limit is raised from 25 to a gargantuan 100. Countries with a lot of states that happen to harbor a wealth of population, such as Qing, will find themselves completely overwhelming other countries just with the massive quantities of conscripts that they can field. Just for reference, the highest amount of conscripts I could find day one was Qing, who, if you manage to beeline for National Militia, can field a mind-breakingly large 2,336 conscripts. If you keep those as irregulars, you can actively field them without going bankrupt. This could open up swarm tactics for taking on countries like Russia for recognition, or even Britain to steal away India. But yeah, National Militia is a hidden gem that is often maligned due to the fact that Professional Army gets all the glory, yet National Militia still deserves its flowers, and you cannot go wrong for picking this law if you have a large amount of states and a large amount of population to use it to its fullest. Perhaps the worst part about Mass Conscription comes from the fact that you need to learn enlistment offices to actually get it. The relative lateness of being able to pick Mass Conscription puts it squarely in the position of overlooked, simply because you are much more likely to be passing other laws, such as compulsory primary school, multiculturalism, no migration controls, graduated taxation, or public healthcare by this point. On the grand scheme of things, you should probably already have professional army and national militia by this point of the game, meaning it won't hurt you one little iota should you put off grabbing mass conscription. So, sadly, mass conscription rarely finds itself actively being looked for. Of course, that does not mean that mass conscription is bad by any measure. It merely means that the timing of the arrival is bad. Mass conscription itself may very well be considered one of the strongest laws in the game. One should only take a look at the United States late game should they get the West Coast. They will be gargantuan and terrifying as an example. You do sadly lose the wonderful morale loss bonus, and instead you eat a horrid plus 5% morale loss penalty. Yet in return, you get the best of both professional army's huge barracks max level limit and the gargantuan plus 100 maximum conscription limit of national militia. You also get a very sizable plus 3% conscription rate, which isn't as large as peasant levies or national militia, but by the time you are actually ready to take mass conscription, it should result in thousands of potential conscripts. I do understand why some people mostly eschew picking mass conscription, however. Fans of professional army will not enjoy the idea of giving up their morale loss modifier, plus most armies by this point have already been set in stone, and the addition of a few thousand conscripts will only matter if they plan to get into high infamy cutdown wars. Still, mass conscription is a good choice, yet again, like with every other choice in this video, it depends entirely on your situation. Mass conscription really does shine if you find yourself fighting against a large quantity of enemies nearing the endgame. The ability to shore up your forces in a pinch can easily save you from disaster more often than not. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this far into the video. This might not be the first time I have glazed every single law, but it might actually be the first time I get some flack for doing so. Hopefully people don't get too bent out of shape about my thoughts about peasant levies. This isn't the only type of video that I do. I will also do a tier list, rant, or playthrough video from time to time, so if you are actually interested in those sorts of things, please click here to watch my most recent tier list for the American flavored companies. Anyhow, good night, and I hope you still enjoy playing Victoria 3. Make sure to give your loved ones an extra hug tonight because you never know if they're going to be here tomorrow, and always remember, Hail Hydra Cat.